Hello and welcome. My name is Mr. Marshall, and today we're going to be talking about the circulatory system, or more specifically, about the blood, because our blood is a really important part of the circulatory system, and without that, there's no point having any of the other bits. So, the main moving part in our circulatory system, before we get to the blood itself, is our heart. Our heart is what's pumping the blood around our body, and it's pumping it through veins, arteries, and capillaries. These are our three main types of blood vessels, but as I said, we'll focus more on them in another video. For the moment, we're going to be talking about blood itself. Now, an adult has between 5 and 6 litres of blood in their body, give or take, depending on how big or small they are. It's not a lot of blood. We're recommended to drink something like 8 litres of water a day. More water should be going in than we have blood at any point in time. The blood's really important though, because it's what carries things around our body. It's what carries oxygen and nutrients and water to our cells. It's also what takes carbon dioxide away from our cells and also other waste products, keeping all of our body's cells healthy. There are 4 main components to our blood that we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at the plasma, red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. These are all really, really important. If you're missing any one of these, you can get into serious strife really, really quickly. And we'll talk a little bit about that right at the end. So, first, let's start with plasma. Plasma is really important because plasma is the liquid part, which is the transports the rest of our blood around. Okay, it's 90% water and it's got other substance dissolved in it. But those other 3 cells we talked about, red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets, these things are all suspended in plasma. That means they're floating around. They're not dissolved, they're not absorbed in. They're just floating in there, moving along with the blood. The next, we have the red blood cells. That's these guys here. These, as you can see, they're sort of like a donut with a middle filled in. They start out as a normal cell, and then the nucleus is removed and basically replaced with what's called hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is what gives blood its red color. It's actually a red protein. And what hemoglobin does is it binds with oxygen as blood passes through the lungs and helps carry that oxygen to the cells where they need. And as we talked about previously, we need oxygen to burn the fuel in our bodies so that we have the energy to do what we do each day. Next one is white blood cells. White blood cells are the way that we defend against infection. So white blood cells do this in a number of ways. Sometimes, if there's a bacteria that the white blood cell can engulf, it will literally do that. It will go and swallow up that bacteria and destroy it inside the white blood cell. Sometimes they produce substances which make the bacteria harmless. So the bacteria can float around in the blood and it's not actually going to affect anything. The last type, there's a type called lymphocytes, which produce antibodies to fight antigens. Okay, but these antibodies can only fight the specific antigen they're designed for. This is why people can get sick with different diseases and then not contract the disease again. So, for instance, one of these is chickenpox. Most people will only have chickenpox once in their life. They contract the disease, their body learns what it's like, develops antibodies that can deal with chickenpox, and then if they ever contract it again, the body automatically remembers what the antibodies are, produces them, and prevents the disease from actually taking a hold. After we look at white blood cells, the last really important bit is platelets. These are what help your blood clot. So if we didn't have platelets in, you get a cut in your finger and it would just keep bleeding, and it wouldn't stop. Platelets, whenever there's damage to any of your tissue, what they do is they activate proteins within your plasma, which create a mesh or a net, which then helps the blood to clot and to dam up that hole, basically to stop blood from getting out. This is what ends up when you have a scab. It's a little bit like your body's way of putting a band-aid on a wound. Last thing, blood diseases. These can be really, really dangerous. As I said, if your blood is not working properly, if you are not producing red blood cells or white blood cells, which are mostly produced in your bones, as we talked about previously, in your bone marrow, if they're not being produced correctly, they don't do the right thing, you can get very, very sick. So, couple of diseases. Hemophilia. Hemophilia is really, really dangerous. This is what I was talking about before. This is those people who their blood doesn't clot. If they get a cut, it can be very, very serious. And the worst thing is bruises are basically internal cuts, internal bleeding. And if you don't clot and you get a bruise, it could just keep on swelling, bleeding more instead of clotting. So if someone has hemophilia, they actually need to get special transfusions with what are called clotting factors that they're missing so that their blood will clot correctly. The next one we're going to look at is anemia. Anemia is when you don't have enough red blood cells. Remember, we said red blood cells are really important. They get the oxygen around so that you can get the energy that you need burnt from the fuel in your body so that your cells can work. If you don't have enough oxygen, you're going to feel tired, sleepy, lethargic. Eventually, you're not going to be able to do much at all. If you've got anemia, you don't have those red blood cells getting that oxygen around, and it is often caused by a lack of iron in your diet. The last one is leukemia. So remember how I said that bone marrow is where a lot of these blood cells are developed from? One of them is your white blood cells from bone marrow. And if you have leukemia, your bone marrow doesn't produce white blood cells correctly. It produces them, but they don't function correctly. They don't actually fight disease. And this can be very, very dangerous as well. And if it's not treated, if a patient isn't given a bone marrow transplant, actually getting bone marrow from someone else and putting it into their own bones, it can be very serious. They can die. As I've said, this is the focus of this video, going through the blood. We talked about these 4 sections: the red blood cells, the white blood cells, the platelets, and the plasma. If you can understand those, you understand generally the purpose of blood and what it's going to do. Next video, we're going to talk about the heart and how it pumps blood through the system. And finally, we're going to talk about the system a little bit and how the blood gets where it needs to go. All of the highways and roads, if you will, to the cells in our body. But that's it. That's it for now.